The summer I turned 19, my mother's job transferred her overseas, leaving me to stay with my uncle, Daniel, and his wife, Vanessa. Their home, a modern, sleek house in a quiet suburb, felt like a different world from my cramped city apartment. Everything was in its place, the air tinged with Vanessa's floral candles, the silence often broken only by the distant hum of a television. Daniel was my mother's younger brother, just past his mid-30s and effortlessly confident. He carried himself with the kind of presence that made people take notice, whether he was laughing at a dinner table or adjusting his tie before heading to work. His dark hair, always neatly styled, framed a face that had just enough roughness to make him look effortlessly attractive. His gym-toned physique and the scent of his cologne lingering in hallways only added to the silent power he exuded. I had always admired him, looked up to him, even. But as I got older, admiration blurred into something else, something I never dare name aloud. Vanessa worked late most nights, leaving Daniel and me to our own routines. He would return from work, loosen his tie, and sink into the leather couch, scrolling through his phone or absent-mindedly watching sports highlights. At first, I tried to keep my distance, unsure how to navigate sharing a space with him, but he had a way of drawing me in. "Lucas, you don't have to disappear every evening," he had said one night, tossing a cold beer in my direction. "I'm not some landlord you need to tiptoe around." That broke the ice. We started spending evenings together, watching movies or talking about everything and nothing at all. There were times when I caught him looking at me for just a second too long, his gaze heavy before he turned back to the screen. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I just wanted to. At night, in the privacy of the guest room, I would replay those moments, questioning every subtle gesture. Was it the way he touched my shoulder absent-mindedly when passing by? The way his voice softened when he called my name? Or was I simply desperate to see something that wasn't there? But there was something else. Vanessa and Daniel's marriage, at least from my perspective, lacked warmth. I rarely saw them interact beyond the occasional polite exchange. When she came home late, she barely acknowledged him before disappearing into their bedroom. Sometimes I would hear muffled arguments behind closed doors. Other times, nothing at all. One evening, after an unspoken tension had been building for weeks, I found myself alone in the house. Vanessa was on a weekend trip with friends, and Daniel had gone out for drinks with colleagues. I had no reason to believe he'd be home anytime soon. Lying in bed, the thoughts I'd spent so long suppressing came rushing in. My body burned with a need I refused to acknowledge in daylight. My fingers traced my skin, my breath came heavier, and I surrendered to the moment, lost in the fantasies I could never speak aloud. I didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear the steady footsteps approaching, but I heard his voice. "Lucas?" My entire body went rigid. The room was dimly lit, but there was no mistaking his silhouette in the doorway. For an agonizing second, neither of us moved. The air felt thick, charged with something I didn't yet understand. I scrambled to pull the sheets over myself, heart hammering against my ribs. I thought you weren't coming home yet." His expression was unreadable, a shadow flickering across his face. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The door clicked shut behind him, but the tension he left behind remained, wrapping itself around me like a secret waiting to unravel. The air in the house felt different after that night. He had seen me, there was no denying it. Yet Daniel didn't bring it up, not in words, not in any direct way. But something had changed between us, something I felt in the way he moved around me now. It was in the way he hesitated before speaking, the way his fingers would tap restlessly against the counter when I entered the kitchen, as if he was working through something he couldn't say aloud. I told myself it would pass, that we could pretend it never happened. But silence itself can be a confession. The morning after, I expected awkwardness, maybe even avoidance. Instead, Daniel acted almost normal. "Almost. Didn't hear you coming last night," I said cautiously as he stood by the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup. He didn't look at me. Yeah, it was late. That was it. No mention of what had happened. No lingering glances. Just a simple response before he took his coffee and retreated to the living room. But as the day stretched on, I noticed the cracks beneath his carefully maintained exterior. He wasn't as relaxed as usual. His casual, effortless charm felt slightly forced, like he was overcompensating. His eyes, when they met mine, held something new, not just discomfort, curiosity. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. Had I imagined the weight in his gaze? The way his breath had hitched for a fraction of a second when he saw me? I should have been ashamed, should have drowned in embarrassment. And yet, beneath all that, there was something else. A thrill, a dangerous, unspoken possibility. A few nights later, we found ourselves alone again. Vanessa was still out late, as always. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when Daniel walked in, looking restless. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing as he sank into the seat beside me. "Long day?" I asked. He let out a dry chuckle. Something like that. There was something different in his posture tonight. Usually, he carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that made people listen when he spoke. But right now, he looked conflicted. His jaw was tense, his fingers gripping the armrest a little too tightly. A commercial played on the TV, filling the silence between us. It wasn't awkward. Not yet, but it was something else. Charged. He cleared his throat, eyes still on the screen. About the other night. The air between us tightened. My fingers curled slightly against my lap. "You don't have to." "I do." His voice was quiet, but firm. "I don't want you to think He stopped, exhaling sharply. "I didn't mean to walk in on you." I swallowed hard. "I know." Another silence. This one heavier. I could feel his gaze now, finally on me, watching. Not just looking, watching, studying. I should have left faster, he admitted, a wry, almost self-deprecating smile playing at the corner of his lips. I forced a nervous laugh. "Yeah, that would have helped." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I asked the question that had been clawing at the back of my mind. "Why didn't you?" Daniel's expression shifted. His grip on the armrest tightened slightly, his knuckles paling. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see the war in his eyes. The battle between what he wanted to say and what he thought he should say. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer, that he would get up and leave, push it aside like an inconvenient thought. But then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't look away. "I don't know," he said finally, voice quieter than before. I should have, but I didn't. The weight of those words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. He wasn't just talking about that night. He was talking about everything, the tension, the stolen glances, the way we kept orbiting around something we weren't supposed to name. I should have ended the conversation. Should have nodded, laughed it off, let the moment pass. But instead, I held his gaze. And for the first time, he didn't look away. We sat there, saying nothing. The sound of the TV droned in the background, but neither of us was paying attention to it. There was no mistaking it now. The shift had happened. Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should get some sleep." He stood, but there was a hesitation in the way he moved, like he was waiting for something, maybe a reason to stay. I could have given him one. Could have said something reckless. Could have reached for him, tested the weight of this dangerous thing stretching between us. But I didn't. "Good night, Daniel," I said instead, voice steady. He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Good night, Lucas." And then he left. But I knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver through me, that this wasn't over. Not yet. The days that followed were a slow burn of avoidance and inevitability. Daniel and I moved through the house like two forces orbiting each other, never colliding but never quite breaking free. Conversations were shorter, glances more frequent. The tension that had always simmered beneath the surface now felt close to boiling over. Vanessa was gone for the weekend, another trip with her friends, leaving us alone in the house. It was a Saturday evening, the air thick with the kind of stillness that amplifies every small sound. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, but I wasn't paying attention to the screen. I was waiting. Daniel had been in his office for hours. Normally, he would unwind in front of the TV or head out for drinks, but tonight he stayed home. He was restless. I could feel it. When he finally emerged, his sleeves were rolled up, the top buttons of his shirt undone. He poured himself a drink without a word, the ice clinking against the glass. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." I didn't have to ask what. He sat down across from me, his body tense. The only sound between us was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. "I've been thinking about that night," he said suddenly. My breath caught, but I forced myself to stay still. "Oh." A humorless smirk played at the corner of his lips. "Yeah. Oh." He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "It's been messing with my head, Lucas." I swallowed hard. "Why?" His eyes met mine, sharp and unreadable. "You know why." The space between us felt smaller than it was. The air, heavier. "I shouldn't be thinking about it," he continued, voice lower now. "I shouldn't be looking at you the way I do." I could have stopped him. I could have given him an easy out, a way to walk away from this. But I didn't. "What if I don't want you to stop?" It was barely above a whisper, but he heard it. I saw it in the way his fingers tightened around the glass, in a sharp breath he took. His eyes darkened. "Lucas." A warning. A plea. I leaned forward slightly, testing the weight of the moment. "You're not pulling away." He stared at me for a long second, his jaw tense, his body rigid like he was fighting some invisible force. Then he set his drink down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he asked, his voice quiet, measured. I nodded. "Do you?" That did something to him. His breathing changed, his fingers flexing against his thighs like he was restraining himself. Then, in a single motion, he closed the distance. His hand came up, fingers brushing against my jaw, barely there, as if testing if I'd pull away. When I didn't, his grip tightened just slightly. "This is wrong," he murmured. I tilted my head slightly into his touch, then stopped. His eyes searched mine, looking for hesitation, for regret. But he wouldn't find any. And then, finally, he gave in. His lips pressed against mine, firm and desperate. The moment they met, something inside me unraveled, years of unspoken longing crashing into reality. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, as if he was still deciding whether or not to let himself have this. But when I reached up, fingers threading into his hair, he let out a quiet groan, and just like that, restraint snapped. He pulled me closer, his hands gripping me like he needed to feel that this was real. The air was thick with heat, the taste of whiskey on his breath intoxicating. When we finally pulled apart, he exhaled, resting his forehead against mine. "This is a mistake." I didn't argue. We both knew what this was. But neither of us was stopping. And that, more than anything, sealed our fate. The moment it was over, reality set in like a crashing wave. Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, his back to me, running a hand through his hair. His breathing was still uneven, but his body was tense, rigid with something unspoken. I watched him in the dim light of the room, my own skin still tingling with the heat of what we had done. I wanted to reach for him, to anchor him back to the moment, but something in his posture told me not to. Minutes passed before he finally spoke. "We can't do this again," he murmured. I swallowed hard. "I know, but we both knew it was a lie." In the days that followed, Daniel withdrew. He was still there, still moving through the house, still making coffee in the morning, still sitting across from me at dinner, but he wasn't there. The easy conversations were gone, replaced by silence that stretched between us like an invisible wall. Vanessa returned home that Sunday evening, her presence resetting the house to something resembling normalcy. She kissed Daniel on the cheek when she walked through the door, murmuring something about how exhausted she was from the trip. He nodded, responding with an automatic, "Yeah, long weekend." But I saw it, the way his shoulders tensed under her touch, the way his eyes flickered toward me, just for a second, before he forced himself to look away. I should have felt guilty. Maybe a part of me did. But the stronger feeling, the one I wasn't ready to name, was something else entirely. Possession. The distance between us didn't last long. It couldn't. Late one night, long after Vanessa had gone to bed, I found Daniel sitting alone in the dim glow of the kitchen, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't look up when I entered, but I knew he felt me there. "You're avoiding me," I said quietly. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. I'm trying to be smart. I took a step closer. And is it working? A bitter chuckle. He rubbed a hand over his face, finally looking at me. His eyes were tired, conflicted. No. The silence stretched, thick with everything we weren't saying. I should have walked away. I should have let him sit there and drown in whatever battle he was fighting with himself. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for his hand. His fingers twitched beneath mine, and for a moment, I thought he would pull away. But he didn't. This isn't going away, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. When he opened them again, there was something raw in his gaze. I don't know how to stop. I squeezed his hand. Then don't. The next few weeks were stolen moments, whispered confessions, the quiet thrill of something we both knew couldn't last. Every touch was a risk, every glance a dangerous game. But reality has a way of catching up, no matter how much you try to outrun it. Vanessa wasn't blind. She noticed the shifts, the distance in Daniel, the way his attention slipped at dinner, the way he lingered in rooms he normally would have left. She didn't ask questions, not yet, but suspicion lingered in the way her eyes traced him when she thought he wasn't looking. Then, one evening, she cornered me in the hallway. You've been different lately, she said, her voice light but laced with something sharper. And so has Daniel. I forced a neutral expression. I don't know what you mean. She tilted her head, studying me. Don't you? The air between us crackled with unspoken words. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That night, Daniel came to my room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, his face unreadable. Then, finally he spoke. She knows. My stomach tightened. Did she say anything? He shook his head. She doesn't have to. A pause. This has to stop, Lucas. I knew this was coming. I had seen in the way his walls had been slowly rebuilding, piece by piece. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. Is that what you want? His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. And that was my answer. I nodded slowly. Okay. Daniel exhaled, running a hand down his face. He looked like he wanted to say more, but there was nothing left that wouldn't make this harder. So, instead of words, he stepped forward and pressed his forehead against mine, just for a second, just long enough to memorize the moment. Then he pulled away, and just like that, it was over. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. Vanessa was quiet over breakfast, her usual small talk absent. I didn't ask where Daniel had gone, and she didn't offer the information. But we both knew. Some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. As I packed my bags later that week, preparing to leave, I allowed myself one final thought, one last moment of indulgence. I would always remember Daniel, and I knew, wherever he was, he would always remember me too.